Welcome to the NC Everything Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis, and this is the bi-weekly show where I talk about everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. Now, this episode is going to be a pretty short one. I was looking into some more North Carolina disasters, and I was looking through some of my notes, and I came across something that said Winston, Salem catastrophe. I looked into that, and it turns out that Winston-Salem has had a pretty good fair share of bad luck. And so I decided I just kind of want to run down all these mishaps for you. You know, it was my intention to maybe collect a bunch from North Carolina, but all of these are going to be in the Winston-Salem area. And again, it's going to be a short episode. I couldn't find a whole lot of information on any of these, but it could be a good source for some further research. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. But I do want to recap that there was the town of Salem that was founded by the Moravians, and then you had the town of Winston, and eventually Winston-Salem became one big city. And so here we go. I know there's in most of my historical episodes there's a fire, something burns, and that's certainly no different in this case. But not all of it. But not all of these are going to be fires. The first one on my list is 1784. It was a fire at the Salem Tavern. The tavern was built from wood in 1771 and burned completely down in 1784. Now, the Moravians, they did build it back in brick. And what's interesting is after they built it back, this tavern, they built it back in brick, they started coming up with ideas of how they could fight the next time, they started coming up with ideas of how they could fight the fire the next time it occurred. They ended up forming what will become one of Winston-Salem's earliest fire departments. Then we'll fast forward to Thanksgiving Day, 1892. They had a hotel called the Zinzendorf, and it was built at 4th and Glade in the West End 2 years earlier, so 1890. And this Zinzendorf hotel was supposed to be the start of some kind of big resort hotel or big resort area. Well, a small fire broke out in the laundry room, and despite Winston-Salem's fire service, they couldn't get enough water onto the fire, and the place burnt down. And unlike the tavern, it wasn't rebuilt. I'm sure something has been rebuilt there since, but it wasn't rebuilt, and the resort hotel thing never really took off. The next one I have nothing on it, but it is out of order. That last one was 1892. In 1877, there was the first Yadkin River flood, which may or may not have been the first one, but that was 1877. The reason it's out of order is because I was reading about the Yadkin River flood number 2 in 1898, and in that research it said this was worse than the flood in 1877, so I stuck it in there. So 1877, the Yadkin River flood, 1898, the Yadkin River flood. Now, the 1898 Yadkin River flood, they said that they had just finished building the Idols Dam power plant, and when the flood occurred, it, I guess, created enough damage that it not only had to fix the power plant, but they had to keep building onto it to prevent more damage from the next flood. And in that research, it mentions that the river was a mile wide at Donahaw, which is in the northwest corner of the county. Keep in mind, I don't know the Winston-Salem area that good, but if you do know the Donahaw area, the river was a mile wide during that 1898 flood. Then we go to 1904, and this was probably, it didn't say, but this was probably the Winston-Salem catastrophe that I had originally seen. Apparently they had a humongous brick and concrete reservoir in town, and I seen a picture of it. It wasn't like reservoirs you see now where it looks like a lake. No, it was a big giant concrete bowl above ground in town. Well, at 5 o'clock in the morning on November 2nd, 1904, this dam ruptured, and it said what later was added up to 180,000 gallons of water came rushing out of this giant bowl. Now, it said that 9 people were killed, 8 houses were destroyed, and others were damaged. I did see some pictures from this flood or this reservoir breaking, and saying that 9 dead and 8 houses were destroyed, that's a huge understatement. It looked absolutely horrible. I don't know if I'll be able to get pictures up on the show here, but I would definitely encourage you to check that out. And now we go to 1912. Parts of Winston-Salem were flooded on March 15th when Salem Creek flooded. And again, I don't know where Salem Creek is or how big this is, but I did talk about Old Salem, and it said that parts of Main Street, which is south of Old Salem, did flood. And it said that a bunch of stores were flooded out and a 700-foot wide pond formed on Main Street. Now let's go to 1913. There was a fire at O'Hanlon's drugstore, and this fire they did build back, but I'm assuming the drugstore itself was kind of small. When they built back, it was a 9-story building, and it's considered one of Winston-Salem's first skyscrapers. In 1940, the Yadkin River floods again. My only notes on this was that it actually moved buildings and a train. 1941, there was a fire at the Piedmont Airlines plane. 1941, there was a fire at the Piedmont Airlines plane hangar. 1958 was Taylor's warehouse fire, and again, I couldn't find anything on any of these. 1969, the White Grocery Brown warehouse fire. In 1998, the former R.J. Reynolds factory on Chestnut Street burned. Now we're changing gears a little bit. In 1989, they believe a tornado swept through town east of Kernersville. That was May 5th, 1989. And everything I did read on that said that it kept saying they believed it was a tornado or what was believed to be a tornado. I'm assuming they never spotted the actual funnel cloud. However, reading about some of the damage and how it was a perfect line kind of going through there, most likely it was a tornado. And the last one I'm going to talk about, it's a pretty big one. It's one I actually do remember. 2022, the fertilizer plant fire. And I'm sure if you lived in the Piedmont area, a lot of you remember this one. But on the evening of January 31st, 2022, a fire started at the Winston Weaver Fertilizer Company facility. Inside the plant, there were 600 tons of ammonium nitrate and 5,000 tons of finished fertilizer. So already you have a huge potential for a catastrophe here. They think the fire started somewhere around 7 p.m. About 90 firefighters and up to 150 EMS personnel. About 90 firefighters showed up to fight the fire, but the fire had reached a train car that was holding that 600 tons of ammonium nitrate. At that point, the firefighters had pulled out, and at some point, they started going out in about a 1 mile area and telling all the residents that they need to clear the area. So it said they were going along with PA systems and knocking on doors and literally just telling people to get out. So all these people were displaced, and most of them, they had to stay away from their homes and businesses for several days. The response to this fire, I know, was based off of a fertilizer plant fire in Texas, and it, debatable. It was handled a little differently, and it ended up being a very big problem. With all this fertilizer and ammonium nitrate around, if it had exploded, it would have been a real big catastrophe. So I know people were really upset, but the best thing for them to do, and I'm speaking from my firefighting experience, the best thing for them to do was to get away from there. But I do know that people were very upset. I think Winston-Salem, the city of Winston-Salem was sued a few times or had multiple lawsuits against them because of all this. Ultimately, the fertilizer plant did burn without explosion. I think later it turned out that the fire wasn't as close to the ammonium nitrate as they thought it was. But that is the last one for this episode. And I do remember that one. My aunt had actually sent me an article the day it was burning. She sent me an article or a video because she lives in Stokes County. So she sent me, while I was at work, the article of this fertilizer plant on fire. And so I do remember that one very vividly. Anyway, that's all I have on this really short episode. As short as it was, I hope you enjoyed it. And again, I couldn't find a whole lot on any of those. I would like to probably revisit some of those and do a fuller episode on some of them, if not all of them. But if you did enjoy the episode, don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and check out the Facebook group for more NC Everything content. And despite it being 70 degrees yesterday, it's like 40 degrees now, and I'm out here freezing. So I'm going to wrap this up, and I'll talk to you in a couple weeks.